Yeah, thanks so much for asking me along. I love these occasions because normally I get to speak to other doctors, medical doctors, but now I get to speak to real doctors and people and teaching. It's so much more. It's so much more interesting. Let me tell you. That's why I asked not to be recorded today. I'm just going to say things which will get me in trouble, I'm sure. So, what I'm going to be talking to you today about is a new kind of concept in the way that we deliver clinical education to medical students. And it's really exciting. It's the culmination of about 3.5 years, 4 years work that probably about half a dozen people at the core have been doing, and probably about 60 in total have been involved in it. And it's called Axiom. One of the religions, one of the most important things that you will ever hear about in the learning of clinical medicine is it's best done with the patient. So I chase my medical students out of the library. It's a bad place to be if you want to learn to be a doctor. Because patients don't come to see textbooks, they come to see other human beings who can match what the doctor has in their head to what the patient presents. There's been loads of research on this. The best way to learn medicine is with real patients. And one of my gripes with the way that medicine's being taught is that more and more students are seeing less and less patients, and not being engaged in that really important dynamic. And there's a whole lot of pedagogical reasons as to why learning with real patients is better. One is it helps students retain information better, because when you are with another human being, you're slightly anxious, you're slightly on edge, you're trying to, the story that they're telling you might be arousing you, and the little old lady might say how she fell over, broke her hip, and no one came to her house for 12 hours, and she struggled to get to the phone. That's quite emotive. Students are going to have that story embedded in their head. From a neurological point of view, it's going to tickle their hippocampus. People know about hippocampi. That actually causes long-term potentiation to lay down memory much more long-term than if they just read, oh, by the way, broken hips are really terrible for old ladies. Yeah? So learning with patients is the best way to learn medicine. The other reason that learning with patients is the best way is because human beings love stories. Yeah, we read books, we go to movies, we watch things on telly. Yeah, our history, all the way back from the cave paintings somewhere in France, are about stories. Yeah? We're tuned, we're set up. Our template is to hear stories. And if you read about the 16 complications of a fractured hip in a textbook, that's meaningless compared to if you sit and talk to a little old lady that's fallen over, broken hip, and she tells you about the infection, she tells you about the pain, she tells you about the incontinence she had, da-da-da-da-da. That story's going to stay in your head. So we, at my unit, are very big believers in seeing patients to learn medicine. By the way, I'm a psychiatrist, so that kind of flavours my message a bit. So the problem with that is that, if you want students to learn about specific disorders, rheumatoid arthritis, heart disease, whatever, you can't just say, go see a patient with heart disease or rheumatoid arthritis, because there may not be a patient in the ward or in the emergency department with that particular condition. Yeah? Or multiple sclerosis, or you take your pick. You can't just say, go and learn about it, because the patient may not be there. Patient interactions are unexpected. They just kind of turn up. And they're serendipitous. The student happens to be at the right place at the right time to see that particular patient. Now, this is a typical teaching program, yeah? So starting off in say, February, I don't have a pointer, but starting off in February and going all the way through to, is it coming out? Yeah, going all the way through to October. This is how we structure our year. Lectures on rheumatoid arthritis to start, then heart failure, cirrhosis, blah, blah, all the way down to chronic renal failure. Every single medical school in the world will have a program like this. Maybe not with that content. In fact, every single teaching unit in the world, I'm building a leap, will have a structured teaching program like that. You've got to book tutors, you've got to book lecturers, you've got to book rooms, you've got to schedule all the student activities. So it's structured. This is the way that stuff is taught. Structured. Yeah? this is the way a typical med student of mine will go into the ward. First day at hospital, which was last week, they'll see somebody with multiple sclerosis. And then they might see somebody with chronic renal failure. And then they might see somebody with diabetes. They're doing it all the way through the year. So you can see that there's a disjunction between the patients they see and the stuff they get taught and the stuff they learn. So this student here has seen a patient with multiple sclerosis in February, but they only get taught about multiple sclerosis in October. And that is such a wasted opportunity, because a patient with multiple sclerosis, has got so much to tell the student, so many signs, so many very nuanced, particular clinical signs and particular history and particular tests. They're not going to know about it here, and then they get their lecture later, they've completely forgotten about it. The same happens conversely as well. Students will get a lecture on rheumatoid arthritis, but they actually won't see a patient with RA until sometime later in the year. So you can see there's a disjunction between the formal teaching and what they see in the ward. So the problem is getting the right teaching to students at a particular time. We do know that if the students aren't taught or forget or haven't learnt about a particular condition, they're not confident seeing a patient with that, so they won't see a patient, so they won't learn a lot. And so a huge waste of opportunity. And the other thing that happens is when students go and say, they'll see a patient with multiple sclerosis, but they haven't had the lecture, they'll just go into autopilot mode of just, this is how I do a neurological examination, and they won't be interacting specifically with that particular patient. Yeah? It's not a good thing. So AXIOM stands for Augmented Experience Modules. It's basically an electronic system. It's a website, pretty much. And the idea is that we give the information to the student right where they want it, just as they're about to see a patient, just as they're seeing a patient, just after they've seen a patient, right at the point of contact. The two bold things at the bottom are really important. We've done loads of focus groups and stuff. What we found is what students love is that the AXIOM content was written by people they know, by clinicians they know or have heard about, and that makes it incredibly relevant, rather than written by clinicians in the States, in England, wherever, New South Wales, who really don't know what it's like to be a medical student in Melbourne. The other great thing about AXIOM, and I'll show you a demo of it in a second, is that it provides a log of encounters. So every time a student sees a patient, they record the clinical details completely anonymously, completely de-identified. They record that, and that way they can go back to it later and have a look at it to see whether, that patient I saw with hepatitis A actually didn't have yellow eyes. Oh, gee, that's a bit unusual, because I just weren't they're supposed to. So it creates a log of their encounters they can learn from later. So this is how AXIOM works. A student hears about a patient, say, with diabetes. Student hears about a patient with atrial fibrillation, which is a heart condition. They read up about it before they see the patient. And this is a screenshot of AXIOM, which tells students all about what that condition is. It's incredibly interactive. It provides loads and loads of content, including videos that we've made and lots and lots of pictures. And from a pedagogical point of view, this is what's quite groovy, is that every single disorder that we've got listed in AXIOM, from atrial fibrillation to diabetes, is structured in terms of the disorder has a summary, the epidemiology, how common it is, symptoms, signs, investigations, and management. So the student gets that framework in their head of how to learn a disorder. And we replicated it here as well. You can see loads and loads of hyperlinks and pop-ups as well. So the student then goes to see the patient. She then enters in the clinical information, all de-identified, all anonymous, into AXIOM. If she doesn't enter in a piece of information, present, absent, or not applicable, the system won't progress. It will say, no, tell me, were there palpitations or weren't there, or you don't remember? And that way it's really comprehensive. It gets students to learn the symptoms, to learn the signs of a particular disorder, because they can't progress unless they complete all of them. At the end of AXIOM, there is a the end of a particular module, there is multiple choice questions. And students have to get all the multiple choice questions correct to be deemed to have completed a module. If they don't get all the questions correct, they're forced to go back to the beginning, do the whole thing again. Not see the patient, but learn all the stuff again. And of course there's feedback with our multiple choice questions as well. We've done 3 rounds of product testing, and each time we've changed the structure, the format, the content, the process of the way Axiom runs. In fact, we scuttled our very first prototype because students said this is terrible, blah, 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 blah. But now in our 3rd round, after 3 years, we think we've got it right, and we've published about this. And this is some of the stuff that students are saying, and some more stuff that the students are saying. So what have we done research-wise? Well, we've been in development for 3 years. We presented it across different medical education conferences, not general education conferences. 3 cycles of user input, and this is probably one of the biggest things which I think we learnt doing 3 minutes till 15 minutes. This is one of the biggest things that we learnt doing an e-resource. You've got to keep engaging your end users. Otherwise you'll make something which looks good to you, but the end users will say, no, this is great. Currently we've got 54 different modules, 54 different diseases, which is about 1/3 of the medical curriculum. All of these were written for free by doctors around Melbourne in Monash hospitals. Probably half of them weren't even Monash associated, they're just like really nice people. We've got Axiom working at 5 hospital networks, about to be 6 across Melbourne, across almost every Monash hospital. This is a graph, you'll have to believe me, because I'm going to rush it through it because I'm pressure for time, but this is what you want to see, is that these students are saying, that one thing there, that how much your confidence improves seeing a patient because of your Axiom module. A very large percentage said it improved heaps thanks to Axiom. It made me more confident to go and see patients. This is just to completely bamboozle you, but every time a student clicks, every time they push something on the Axiom site, we report it. So we have got gigabytes of data looking at some of the important questions for teaching and learning. Specifically, when do students study most? Yeah, so we're going to start trying to figure out ways of getting students not to do this. Here are some of the popular modules, and if you were a medical audience, you'd go, woohoo, lots of people doing stuff on rheumatoid arthritis and atrial fibrillation. And here are some of the other disorders that students are looking at. So we can also tell, what are students looking at? What are they learning about? What sorts of patients are they seeing? This is the back end, and I'll run you through this quickly. This is a list of all the students, so my students. I can click on a particular student, so I'll click on Fiona Foley. It's a fake student name. Well, actually, it's my project manager's name of the site. I just want you to know, I'm very conscious of privacy. She's seen a patient with atrial fibrillation and a patient with chronic heart failure. I then can click on and say, well, what did you actually see when you saw that patient with atrial fibrillation? Oh, you said that they had palpitations. So, Fiona, how did you ask the patient about palpitations? How did they describe it? You know, so we can actually drill right down to the patients that the students have seen. The future is this, more modules. And currently, this is why being where I am at the Alfred is great. Doctors come to me and say, I want to write stuff for you. It takes about 12 hours to write. They will write the stuff for us. We're getting more modules on board. We want to distribute this as widely as we can to as many doctors and students and clinicians and tutors as we can. We're trying to implement this into the curriculum. So currently at my particular site, I've got, I can do what I want. So I've integrated it into my curriculum, but I want to integrate it to the curriculum across Monash. We're going to do loads more of research. And we also want to publish this as an e-resource, not just with the patient input side, but also just at the content side as well. Thanks very much.
goes in and after the students have learnt diabetes, the person with diabetes comes in and they do a physical exam, etc. That sounds exactly like what you are doing. Are you guys talking to each other?
It's not exactly what we're doing, and we're trying to do a similar thing to that. By the way, Deacon's got one of the best medical courses there is, so, you know, I'm very, very jealous.
Deacon and Monash, it's a joint project.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, it is. No, ours is different. This is students embedded on a team on the ward, and it's not structured, so you won't be going to, say, a lecture on diabetes, then having the patient come along with diabetes to say, this is what is happening to them. The student is wandering through the ward. I grab them and say, hey, there's a patient with really significant psoriasis. Go see them over here. You know, so it's about them being taught in context. But I'm very jealous of the Eastern School. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I'm from the library, so just to say, a lot of our textbooks go with students now, they're not just in the library. But I'm just wondering, I mean, it sounds like a great resource. Are the experts citing references throughout their content? Is that?
Yeah, no, my project manager might be able to speak to that.
Yeah, so the authors of the modules reference and also provide additional references to journal articles and textbooks and that sort of thing for additional reading.
So it's sort of evidence-based.
Yeah, it's very easy for us to update it. So if something changes, they'll just take it down, change it down. Ask questions here.
You said you sort of ditched the first version of it and changed it dramatically since then. What sort of mistakes did you make the first time around?
Too many. Our screen was way too crowded. We didn't even have navigation buttons to go forward and back, to go down to different sections. We had floated the idea of being GPS locatable. So if you say I saw a patient in Ward 4E, we knew you were in Ward 4E. We mentioned that to them and this is horrible. And on reflection, we thought, what were we thinking? You know, so all those kind of issues. It was, you know, that user testing was so important.
We might finish these so we can stick to the schedule. Thanks, Rob. So our next speaker is Cregan from Faculty of Arts. Talk to us about getting graduate students to write more.
To get published, yes. So, yeah, my name's Cregan. I'm from the Arts Graduate Research School and Faculty of Arts. I've been running the Graduate Researchers in Print program for the last 6 years now, since 2009, which has recently been renamed Arts Graduate Research Professional Development because in the new Monash doctoral program they have an acronym group and it was going to be confusing, so we changed so that we don't confuse students. I found this picture when I was preparing another presentation because to me it sort of signified a fairly traditional approach to research, which is sort of being very centred on an idea, very focused on an idea, a creative idea, but as I think Blake's probably saying, missing out on all the lovely trees that are around you. I suppose what GRIP aims to do is to, in the spirit of what Barbara et al. Say, is to tap into that idea of creativity, but not just individual creativity. Creativity is something that can be done in a group. Sciences have known about this for a long time. It's much less familiar to humanities and social sciences people. They're much less likely to work effectively in a creative team. So the aim of the Graduate Researchers in Print programs in the first instance was to encourage postgraduate writing. And there are many different genres of writing within academic work. Writing is a creative endeavour, but I also like to think of it as being a social act, a communicative act. We might sit down, even if we do sit down and write alone, in that sort of headspace of being terribly creative, a romantic idea of an author, there's got to be somebody at the end of it. And presumably, hopefully, a lot of people at the end of it. So there are a number of different ways in which we expect our high degree research candidates to become writers. We expect them to write for a thesis, to write for an ethics application if they're dealing with human subjects, for a conference presentation, for publication, for grant applications, and also increasingly for a non-academic audience. All of these things, all of these different ways of writing are actually separate genres, or they have separate expectations of the style and also the audience. None of them comes naturally, but I propose that all can be acquired. The question for graduate researchers in the print program and the initial stage of it was how do we go about doing that? So it focused initially on improving high degree research candidates' publications. It started in 2005 as a pilot research program that was actively supported by the Dean and successive Associate Deans of the Faculty of Arts. They put, basically they put money into it. They put research funding into it in the first stage, and then they put funding into the position that I now hold. It's based on practical but expert assistance for HDR candidates to succeed at publishing, initially in international peer-reviewed research articles. My own background, I have a strong research background. I have expertise in writing books, writing journal articles, writing research reports. I'm widely published, but I've also been on the other side of that equation, which is as the editor-in-chief of an international peer-reviewed journal, which was in those rankings that we don't talk about anymore. It was an A-ranked journal. So I do understand both sides of that process and what journal editors, what reviewers are looking for. It actually anticipated aspects of the higher education standards framework and wider shifts in the HDR space that has started to realise that we do actually need to have clear aspects of professional development in our high degree research space. So it's part of learning to be a researcher. I think sometimes, or traditionally, going back to that picture from Blake, it's as if a researcher is like an author, the romantic idea of an author. Someone is going to come to research. They might work with their supervisor, they might have mentoring through that on how to become a researcher. But in many ways, it's been structured as something as go and do it. You'll find out how to do it as you go along, as you do the research. It's not the case for the vast majority of people. It's actually something that we learn. And it has also been consciously interdisciplinary from the outset. So I'm in the Faculty of Arts. When I say interdisciplinary, I mean across all the humanities and social sciences. When I started, geography, the scientific end of geography was still in the faculty. They've recently moved, I've forgotten now where they went to, whether it's engineering or to space somewhere. The human geography people have remained with us. But there are very different ways of going about understanding what research writing is across, say, history, philosophy, politics, anthropology, sociology, English literature, languages, translation studies, all those different areas. Okay? The idea of putting students together in mixed groups was to give them a wider sense of other people outside your area might actually have something relevant to say on the topic. So it's aimed at fostering collaborative and ethical research in a group setting. As I said before, group or team research is something that humanities and social sciences have been grappling with, say, over the last 10 years, moving towards it, but it's not something that has really become embedded as yet. And this is just one little quote from a candidate some years ago who recognised the importance. The candidates do recognise the importance of publishing to their future career if they want to be an academic. So, the practical aspect of that, of setting up that way of learning how to write, was through what's now called Mastering Journal Writing. It's a curriculum-based interdisciplinary peer-reviewed writing workshop that runs across the year from March to November. It has an online component. It's offered to all confirmed HDR candidates across the Faculty of Arts who are ready to rework part of their thesis publication. There are between 12 and 18 participants in any year, although across two groups, although last year there were 26, which was a bit of a challenge for me. Because I must say, I'll show another slide very quickly later, I do also run 4 other groups of thesis writing workshops and 3 streams of ethics writing applications across the year, 0.6. I know. The outcomes are the production of an article that is ready for submission to an international peer-reviewed journal. There have been over 50 publications from the students in the group since 2009. I'll say a little bit more about that. Ready for submission, perhaps half of the students in the groups will have something ready for submission. Perhaps the other half will have published during the year. They will actually get it in and get it published with, or at least get it accepted within the year. It develops an understanding of and an ability to apply different communication strategies, because it also goes through both expert and non-expert genres. There is discussion of ethical and professional practice, but there's also significant interdisciplinary cohort building in it. I consciously go about setting up the groups. I ask students, and I have one of my former students in the room today, to provide me with a short description of their topic before they begin. So I'm able to look at those topics and I can see connections between someone's work in, say, literary studies and someone's in politics. The common thread may be understanding intercultural issues. Someone will be dealing with it in literature, perhaps presented in fiction. Someone will be dealing with it in a social research context. So that I will find links to bring these people together so they have something to contribute to each other from a different perspective. Going back to the question about what went wrong with Rob's program, there were some things that went wrong early on. It was realised after the first 2 years, I think, that it's ineffective if it's undertaken too early in candidature. If students come to it before they've achieved confirmation, they don't yet have their ideas firmly enough fixed or well enough worked through to write something that they're going to be able to publish, and that can end up being counterproductive. They can make them feel that they failed, that they're not able to write the publication. It's merely a matter of not going back to ideas of being a writer and the idea of writer's block. I've forgotten who said it, but somebody said that writer's block doesn't exist. It is, in fact, more a matter of you not knowing what you want to say yet. Once you know what you want to say, words will flow. So we didn't want to induce writer's block. So supervisor's affirmation of an individual's capacity to balance thesis and publication writing is also important. The supervisor knows the candidate best, will know what they've been like and being able to hand in work before, keep deadlines, that sort of thing. Because it is a significant issue to balance two different kinds of writing at the same time. And it requires considerable time commitment on the candidate's part and trust. Part of that building trust is helped, I hope, by my active facilitation of the groups. As one candidate and some of the research panelists said, I keep the temperature of the room. So I try to keep everybody nice, basically. So entry is by nomination. After confirmation of candidature with supervisor support, this will now be done through GRAMS as well, the new graduate research administration management system. It's open to research and PhD candidates in 10 sessions over the year. Has 2 expectations: regular attendance, and that everyone will comment on others and present their own writing for review. Regular attendance is really important as far as I'm concerned, because it really does go towards that building of trust and people's ability to listen to other people's criticism. It's made into, I think, what our guest speaker was talking about, into a safe place where by the time people, the first couple of sessions, we don't deal with reading other people's writing, or only a little bit of it. So by the time we come to reading a draft of an article, people don't feel that criticism coming from one of their peers is destructive. You know, it might be hard. Sometimes people do say hard things, but they've learned a little bit about that person. So yes, both of those aspects go towards building trust, building a group dynamic, and mutuality. How do we know it works? Well, it's got consistently high satisfaction ratings across 20 question 5-point record scale anonymous online questionnaire that I run every year, which goes into an executive report which is presented at faculty research committee. We also know by publications outcomes. As I said, 50 publications in international referred journals since 2009, which is almost certainly an underestimate of the actual output, because I email candidates at the beginning of the next year. Some of them may have left Monash. I ask them to tell me what they believe the program has assisted them in publishing, so they may underestimate the amount that the program has assisted them towards publishing. And yes, it is almost impossible to track candidates past their graduation. From responsiveness to HDR feedback within those early groups, and when it was only running as a publications group, 2 groups that have been added since: thesis writing workshops, which is where I get about 35 to 45 participants a year, and also the expressing ethics workshops, which is sitting down. I've drawn on my work in the medical faculty when I coordinated the teaching of ethics into the medical degree, in order to help people through their MU-OLT application. I'm actually a member of MU-OLT now. Skip that. I'll just leave you, because I'm about to run out of time, with some final words from candidates who've gone through the publications and thesis writing workshops who are now academics. Thank you. Questions? Okay.
Great program. Have you thought, I saw interdisciplinary in terms of the people that come to the workshops. Have you thought of something outside of that?
times. I know through the Monash Postgraduate Association, the person who runs that has had candidates come, they've heard about it, they want to be able to do it. I would be happy to look at doing that. The reality is, as I said on point 6, it requires someone else to do it or more of me to do it. It may change with the new graduate research suite of offerings, because this is within that suite of offerings. But at the moment, the way that works is it's only going to be visible to people who are in the faculty of arts. So, yes, I think it would work in other disciplines. I have done it in art and design with a small group of people. When I was working in medicine, I was working in an area that had a number of postgraduate students. I did it with them. So it does work.
Because I could see sort of people from medicine and health sciences working with people from arts.
Absolutely.
And so much good work for that.
Yes.
Thanks, Kate. This is just a question of detail. So when somebody is participating in the workshop, which is designed to produce a journal article, how many opportunities does an individual get to get feedback on their successes?
It can be as many times as they want within the schedule, usually 2 or 3 times. And that gives them time to go away, work up on something, add more to it, refine. So it's an expectation that it's not a rough draft, not a really, really rough draft that comes. People are expected to write an abstract in one of the first few sessions. So it is quite, it builds. So I wouldn't be expecting necessarily to see 2 or 3 different articles, although that has happened and people have successfully published those.
And that's within a group of what number? So how many
Varies.
sessions do you need to have to accommodate multiple?
I usually run in 2 groups. So last year we did start with 13 and 13. There was a degree of attrition, thank heavens, because it really works best between 8 and 12. Any more than 12, well 8 and 10 really, more than 12 people, it doesn't work very well.
That means that you would be looking at more than one piece of work per session.
Sorry?
You'd be looking at more than one piece of work
Yes.
per session.
Yeah, and the curriculum element within that mention as well, because there is curriculum.
There aren't any further questions. Let's thank her again. Our final speaker for the session is Paul White from the Faculty of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences, and he's going to talk about developing active learning in pharmaceutical sciences.
So you're the only one that's opted in for this so far. So is that an off and on?
Yeah.
Under the thing.
Oh, that is working, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Doesn't.
Okay. Thanks, Ian. Pleased to be here. So I guess what I'm going to be talking about briefly today, so that we can all have lunch, is my teaching journey, what I've changed over the time that I've been at Monash, and also a bit about our faculty change. So change is really the focus. We've changed from a faculty that's very research intensive to one that's, well, sorry, my dean will sack me for saying that. We're still very research intensive. And don't tell him that I said that. But with a very traditional teaching approach to one where we're really challenging everything we do in teaching. And I think everyone here, to cancel that recording, everyone here is here because they're interested in teaching. I think it's really important for us all to think about the journey that we take, because we're often appointed for reasons not to do with our teaching prowess. We're appointed for many other reasons, but that's not normally, I think, why T&R staff are appointed. So the journey that we take is important, and I think it is wobbly, like this diagram. It is up and down. There are times where we focus on our teaching a lot and times where we don't. And I think as a university we need to think about that in terms of how we get people to be, aspiring to excellence in teaching. When I started in 1999, which is quite a while ago now, I just hoped, my pants didn't fall down when I stood up to lecture. I had low expectations. I told what I hoped were good stories. I tried to get all the content out there, and I hoped that the students in exams could tell me back what I told them, essentially. I was looking for a transfer of content and they could tell that back to me. And if they used one of my jokes or analogies in an exam, that was, a great day in my early career. And then after a while, I realised that students who could do that on an exam, the next year, if I asked them about the same sorts of concepts, if I moved from how the body works to how the drugs work in that system that we were talking about last year, they couldn't remember anything. It was so disappointing that that method didn't work. And I thought, well, there's 150 years of this lecture style. Is it just me? What's going on? And I was getting great teaching evaluations. There was lots of good things going on, but students couldn't do what I wanted them to do, which was, to be able to use the information I was giving them to solve complex problems that they were going to face as graduates. So I really engaged in a lot of conferences about education. I had some great mentors. I travelled around the world and spoke to people who were experts in active learning. I did lots of things to try and figure out what to do. And really, I guess what I'd say to you is what I've thought a lot about now is it's working out what you want to achieve and why you want to achieve that drives your methods. So concept mapping, I think, is a fantastic method, but by itself it doesn't mean much unless it's a means to an end. And that end is that students can, in our situation, we teach pharmacists, they get patients coming in with complex medical conditions, complex personalities, and the pharmacist needs to be able to deal with that sort of situation with lots of knowledge, but also lots of skills, interpersonal skills. They have to be able to talk to someone. So what I do now is really, a system that I think works for me. I'm not being evangelistic. I'm presenting some evidence today for a system that works. But I really think, I challenge everyone here to engage as much as they can with, what's already known. There's so much out there in terms of educational literature about what can be effective. And we've heard some great talks already today about people who are really innovative. I think soak everything up is definitely my advice. This guy here, Harold Meigel, I'll just briefly mention him. He, in a bar, sitting in a bar in Seattle over a beer, really, I was going on and on about concept mapping and all these methods that I thought were great. And he stopped me and said, okay, what you're talking about is the what, it's why, the how, will come about once you know the why. So I think that's a critical message. Change of tack for a moment. We're measured at the moment a lot by SETU outcomes. And I think it's really important to think about what you're doing in terms of teaching for the outcomes of student attainment of learning outcomes. But we need to be pragmatic and realise that we are measured this way. And I think in changing my teaching, you can see around the time where I really have been doing a lot of innovation, you do perturb the system and students do get affected by that. And sometimes you need to learn from experience, as we've been saying today. But I think you can go from a system where you're really expecting in 1999 just students to listen and regurgitate to one where I expect them to come into an exam, face a completely novel scenario and solve that, and you can still be popular, semi-popular. Okay, so I've been through this really. The drivers for my change were pedagogical reasons, looking and thinking hard about what I was trying to achieve. There was a mismatch between telling people stuff and then expecting them to develop all these skills. There's empirical evidence. As a cardiovascular pharmacologist, I would not ignore a body of scientific evidence and just keep doing the same old thing despite that. And also, I don't know if it's a general experience here, but we've seen plummeting attendances at lectures throughout the last 7-8 years since we've introduced recording of lectures. So that was another driver. Okay, so here's my model. My model is that I think students, when they're trying to develop these skills, they need to encounter the content before they come to class. I want my valuable class time to be spent on students having already heard the words before, heard atrial fibrillation before, and not be just getting to grips with the very basic principles. So I want them to come to class having already heard that stuff. So I do pre-recorded videos. There's many good ways to do it. In classes, I want students to develop a strong understanding of the relationships between body systems, cells, inside cells, whole organs. I want them to develop those relationships so that when they come to a problem where they need to know how a drug's going to work in a system or invent a new drug, hopefully, that they have the fundamentals. I know PBL has the approach of having the scenarios and then getting the students to go back to develop the first principles. Lots of good parts about that, but I think my belief is that it's better to work on the principles early on. You can have a scenario to motivate students, as to where they're going to, but I think getting the principles right is important. The other thing I'd say I've learned from experience is you can't give students one scenario. The end of lecture 7 out of 7, you give them one scenario, we talk through it, and that's it. They should know how to solve scenarios. I don't think that works. I think critical thinking and creative hypothesis generation takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of practice with divergent examples, not just one or two. And I think if you try and just go from presenting content to solving complex problems, you're very likely to fail. So in most of my classes, the students are working together. You can see up the top they're not actually listening to me, they're working together on a problem. And down here they're working in groups of 3, doing reasonably directed tasks in terms of concept mapping, moving towards scenario solving. I would say I've learnt a lot about student cohorts from sort of very basic analytics. So the top right there is you can get from Moodle, if you post videos on Moodle, you can find out which students haven't had a look at the video. And the bottom one, we have clicker. Every student in our faculty has their own clicker, which is registered to us, so we know which students attend which classes. And you can track which ones attend, and I've put this one up because it's probably the best attendance figures I had over a long period of time. But you can track individual students and how they're going. And what I've really started to look at a lot is that there's no such thing as what students think or what students do. There's so many diverse subpopulations within a student cohort that it's not helpful to try and think of them as a body, an amorphous sort of mass. I mean, we all know that anyway, but we do tend to say, well, the students say this. And I say, well, the students don't say anything, really. They say a lot of things. So I'll be brief. What I've done here is divide the pool of students into those that prepare for classes and turn up. I've given them the green. The ones who don't prepare and don't turn up are red. And then in between there's some students who prepare and don't turn up, or vice versa. So you can see, depending on the cohort, my expectation is that everyone turns up to everything, and depending on the cohort, sometimes, most of them will do it, and sometimes they won't. What's really interesting to me is when I looked back from the students in my group and looked at the performance of the red ones, so the ones who didn't turn up to my classes and didn't engage in my classes, the year before, their marks were no different to the other students. And it'd be very interesting to go back. We have done a bit of this analysis of what was on those exams. But essentially, students can succeed in our course, in some parts of it, by not turning up to anything, basically, except for the compulsory classes. Which was quite depressing, but I'll come back to that data. I'll come back to that data a bit later. So, I think concept mapping is really important. I've talked about that. The good thing here is that when students turn up to a class with a draft concept map, work in a group of 3, they peer assess each other's concept map, they can get to something that's much better than what's in the textbook, to be quite frank. Really, this is a great example. And then what they can do is use it. So this is this describes the relationships that determine blood pressure. And then students can come back in the next year, work out, put a little X where the drugs are interacting with that system. So they can use the concept map. And then when they get to the scenario, and they don't all look the same. They don't all converge on the same model. I mean, they use different colours and that sort of thing, but they all look different. Then they go to these scenarios, and I give them some feedback on those scenarios. When we get to the end of that, it's really important, I think, and I'm sure what you've seen, Rob, is when a student has an experience that has no right answer, you know, as you would see all the time, that they often go away thinking, I'm not sure exactly what I've learned here. There's uncertainty about the outcomes. And so what we try to do at the end, or what I try to do at the end now, is to present them with a number of student options that I validate and say, these are all good, I want you to try and rank them. And then we are tackling that difficult concept that there can be multiple right answers, but some more right than others. You know, getting to that depth is where students are getting close to what a graduate does. You know, a graduate doesn't just go for, you know, the best multiple choice answer. That's not what graduates do. So they use the clickers to rate those. And I think clicker questions are a great means to a conversation. So you can say, well, here's a scenario, what would happen now if this happened? And get them to try and argue the toss over that. All right, so I'm nearly finished. So I'm coming back to some ideas here. Ideas about, or some data, looking at, so the red and the blue lines here, I don't know if you can see those properly, relate to for knowledge, the top graph, critical thinking is the middle, and then hypothesis generation is the bottom one for two different units. And you can see the blue ones are the students who turned up and who prepared, and the red ones didn't either turn up or prepare. And what's really striking is that in the exam, there's, you know, certainly a big separation of the two. So there's a big difference in terms of students who haven't prepared and engaged to deal with these complex scenarios. They might be able to get close enough in terms of knowledge sometimes, although you can see not always. But certainly with hypothesis generation, there's a big difference. And students who didn't prepare and didn't engage weren't able to deal with these complex situations, which was great because I was a bit worried that we were wasting our time having classes. I won't go through this because it's quite interesting to start looking at the ones who prepared but didn't engage, or didn't prepare but did engage, and what happened there. But in the interest of time, I won't talk about that. What I think that students have started to do in those classes where we have a bit of metacognition about dealing with scenarios is that they're having some strategies. They're starting to, some of them, and we did some surveys, Som's in the audience, we did some surveys to look at what strategies students developed when they were repeatedly tackling complex scenarios. And the ones who didn't turn up obviously weren't doing that. When we asked them, they had no real complex strategy that they developed. So that's it for that one. I'll just briefly mention it as I finish. We have made a change in our whole faculty to move away from didactic lecturing to active learning. And I'll finish with this slide. So what we found as we moved away from didactic lectures across the faculty is that most students love active learning, except for the ones that hate it in the first instance. And they often write very long set-you comments. It takes time for even the students who love it to recognise that it makes them learn better. They can say, I love it, but I think I learn better in traditional lectures, and it took time for that shift. Attendance went up by about 50%, nearly 50%. Staff workload increased threefold. But the next year fell back to around the levels before that, so that was good. We saw a change in what staff think and do. They asked questions that were higher in terms of Bloom's taxonomy. They stopped asking quite so many questions that said, tell me back what I told you, and they asked the questions that were asking for synthesis, application, evaluation. Lots of people have been really helpful in this, including Anne and Som, who are in the room, and I'll finish there, and thank you for your time.
questions for Paul?
My question, I'm not familiar with the cost of a clicker, so how much investment was that to say that you're going to dedicate a clicker to each students? Secondly, I often reflect on the fact that at the end of the semester, the only thing that students get from us normally is a result that says 74% and that's it. And we don't necessarily have a very detailed conversation with them about the why or what they didn't know. You were using that data to get an understanding of the characteristic of their engagement. Does that ever fed back to the students and say, well, we've got a concern about your level of engagement or your level of preparation?
Yeah, not on it. So the second one first, didn't feed back to them individually. I've definitely fed back the data on performance as a group, saying our model is this, here are our expectations, here's your most likely outcome if you don't engage, and I think that's a conversation to have. But we definitely have used the analytics for ones who are, say, not turning up to anything to chase up a few, particularly in first year, to say, hey, you're really not engaging, we're worried about you, what can we do? Clickers, I think that we have spent about $15,000 a year as a faculty for a few years to give all our students clickers, and then we'll sort of rotate them. They have it for the duration of their course, and then so it's a significant investment, and we've been very lucky to have faculty leadership that have put money in.
What is your class size?
So the first year pharmacy is about 200 and about 100 for pharmaceutical science. So a 200 graduate.
Are you handling the lecture class yourself?
Yep.
With the help of tutors or just yourself?
I have done a little bit with tutors, and I think that's the way of the future. Either to make it smaller groups or with tutors. I think I can do an effective active learning class with 200 in groups of 3, but I'm sure there's pockets of the class where they're getting a bit distracted. But if your expectation, we talked a lot about this today with Brendan, if your culture and your expectation says, in my class, I'm going to come and ask you as a group of 3, I won't try and shame you, but I will go and sit down right there and say, what do you reckon for this? And I think you can create a culture where even large classes do engage. But I think tutors in the room just adds a lot of value as well.
This method being applied widely through the faculty or university? Still got people leading with active methods?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a time of big change in the university. I've done a few talks at different departments and faculties, and some departments, are very traditional in the way they teach, and some have really changed a lot. I don't think there's a sort of universal method. In our faculty, we do a lot of, there's people do a lot more group work. So I think Laurence, who's talking today, and Ian, do a lot more group stuff. My work is in groups of 3, but they're not groups of 3 that do a group assignment throughout the semester. And I think that's, in terms of skill development, there's a lot of benefit in that. So no, I don't think this is uniformly adopted. What we said as a faculty is we won't do didactic. We'll have classes where students will prepare and students will stop to tackle common activities. And that's as far as we went in terms of being prescriptive.
I'd like your views on connectivity of knowledge and learning from one unit to another. It seems to me, in my experience, students see things in almost siloed forms. Have you got any great ideas I can steal on that topic?
It's a great point. I totally agree. And the university system encourages that because we have to have everything in a 6 credit point unit. It's a box. I totally agree. I think creating explicit linkages, and that means getting the teachers in a room to go, okay, what are you doing and what am I doing and how. It's not just content, it's not just I covered that in those 4 slides, it's that activity can then lead to this activity next year. And we're talking a lot about that. I think, it's explicit linkages and tasks that point directly back to, you did this before, you achieved that, now can you do this? But I think you're absolutely right.
I know there are more questions. We might finish there. Paul will be here.
Very happy. Yep.
the thing I was interested about.
Yes, on the question.
This is how, you know, these are the signs, these are the just, you know, this is what
Some of them, speaking was much better than I do, you know, but we do have they can, yes, and to break out the mindset that I know a lot more than them, so I should be the one to actually talk it through.
And they're going to stop under
I might actually go outside and get lunch from somewhere else.
I think it's critical. Now, I know what you're saying, and the problem is, if you don't close the loop on an activity, the students get really worried about, you know, what do I write on the exam? Because I tried something and I got an idea, but it's right, and obviously you can't check, you know.
I mean,
They didn't want you to tell you. And so this email went back, so I just hit it straight back to him. It said,
Do you know about this? And then he went to the late today and telling us that, but only I was scared to do too much. And I had like 8 or 2% for the case that allocated for it, and they were great. Well, I jumped in if I needed to, like you said, and didn't really stuff it up, but I just made sure I corrected it.
Yeah, it's where they went.
Yeah, and some liked it, like you said, they hated it like it, and I'm pretty new to lecturing, it's only my second year, so I'm very much over the line in terms of traditional level, the active learning. We've got though maybe 60 a class, 80, sometimes 100. My stream's officially 125.
Okay, so you've got, yeah, yep.
Yeah, listening online. I'm just wondering how much to kind of keep pushing the active learning, because so 3s are also probably better than 2s. Although for us, 2s work on prosecution defence and that kind of
Yeah, so it sort of fits the model.
But,
yeah,
how
look,
much do they share? That's, I guess, my big question. In the lecture, how much are they sharing over you talking?
I'm now talking, so most of my talking is done before, so
pre-recorded.
as in pre-recorded. So I will probably, I'll introduce, I'll spend say 3 or 4 minutes introducing what they have to do, and then I'll give them maybe 5 minutes on part 1, and then we'll come back together for at least a minute to say, and I'll generally do it now. I used to get the students to come up with that, but and sometimes that's good. But I think as a model, it doesn't work. It takes a long time, and they're worried about doing it, and they don't quite get it right. So what I'll do is sometimes I'll take the written work, you know, they've written down 3 ideas, and I'll present them, and I'll say, let's talk about that. You know, we'll say, is there something they've mucked up, or is it great? And we just say that's perfect. You know, I think it's good to validate a student answer rather than if you present the answer at the end and they know that you're going to do that, well, they will, or they'll, exactly. They just won't take it seriously because they know they're getting the correct answer, and why would they try and make an imperfect version of that? So if you say, I'm only going to present student answers, but I'm going to validate the parts that are right, then they know they're getting, some right stuff, but they know also that it's going to be one of them that, has to cough up. I think that works really well, and I think if you don't close the loop, if they feel like you haven't come back together as a group, then they don't know what they've learnt.
Because when they're all on laptops, they don't have paper. Fix that by bringing some paper.
You can. There's lots of. You could do sort of.
Keep open a Moodle.
You can even people use Facebook pages now. You can just post on Facebook. But
I think they're all using unofficial Facebook pages.
Yeah.
I mean, they're doing everything group-wise, unofficially. We have regular tunes. They've just changed the 2-hour workshops instead of 1-hour tunes. But I'm so curious how you do that one, because yours might be more practical, like in the sense, I don't know.
Probably, I think they're not the same. Like students have cohort differences, but I think generally students, actually, because I go to talk at law faculty, and I have the same question, how will students work together? Or you can see that they're competitive, so they wouldn't share. But if your culture and your expectation is such that here's the exam, I'm going to tell you exactly what the exam's going to involve. Obviously, you're going to need to prepare for it, but if you do this approach, in the end you will be able to tackle exam difficulty questions before the exam, and you will go into the exam pretty sure that you're going to go well if you follow the approach, and if you've got evidence to back that up.
I was just going to say, various that they'll find, you've got to do something similar. I even told them actually with law students, I think it's taught by Justice Cregan, law students have 3 times the mental health issues that med students do, and the reason is that med students work with crack and in groups.
Yeah.
And we are a very competitive, horrible culture, which I want to change.
Yeah.
And I do think even if it's in the context of elections, 2